What's up, HyperFast Nation? On this episode of the show, I sat down with a real estate veteran of 2 decades who has experience wholesaling, flipping, lending, developing. He has done it all. He is the founder and principal of His Capital Group. Welcome to the show, Rick Melero. All right, welcome to the show today, Rick. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, my friend. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us in the virtual world. Why don't you give our listeners here at HyperFast Nation a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to where you are today?
Absolutely. So the cliff notes, if you will. Actually, I started in real estate about 20 years ago. And I honestly was in a really long search of finding a way that I can finance my purpose. And I actually, in my research, found out that the wealthiest people in the world all had one thing in common, and real estate was a part of all of their net worth in some form or fashion. And so I started a pursuit of trying to get involved in real estate. Now, of course, the problem I had at the time, I didn't have the money, nor did I have the knowledge. So I actually tried to get a job because mentorships were way too expensive and I didn't have those resources. And actually, my very first gig, I got fired the first day. The guy told me, "You don't have experience, I can't bring you on." And so I interned for 6 months, and the rest is history. I actually worked for free for 6 full months, learned the business, started wholesaling properties, started really learning what it was like to analyze and negotiate deals that had enough room, not only for me, but also for the investors. And then over time, that business continued to grow. We started flipping. We started doing ground-up constructions. And actually fast forward the 2008 crash, we actually now are private lenders. We have funds. We've been doing a lot of real estate in all kinds of sectors. I've just been really blessed to be in this space. This space is an amazing place for people to build long-term wealth.
Well, I always like talking to people that have been in it for a while, specifically people that were in it back in the mid-2000s, because you've been through all types of market cycles.
Oh, 100%. I call it my BC days, before the crash.
I love that. What lessons did you learn during that time that have helped you since then?
So I would really say that while there's a lot of lessons we learned through a lot of mistakes that we made, it really comes down, in my opinion, to 2 key things. The very first fundamental thing that people need to understand is that in real estate, just like in any business, the reality is it's all about a cycle. There are always going to be cycles, no matter how we like it or if we don't like it. You have to understand, because the market doesn't tell you basically how to buy, right? Or when to buy. It really shows you how to buy within each stage of the cycle. There's always a specific strategy that you can implement to capitalize, whether the market is great or whether the market is down. And so understanding the cycle was one of the key lessons I learned. But then furthermore, I think this is an essential aspect of it, is that once you understand the cycles and you understand that not every strategy works at every stage, then the next level was really learning how to diversify your investment approach and not being a one-dimensional investor is what I call it. So we developed this strategy called the 40-40-20 plan. And generally, just to kind of give you a synopsis, 40% of our capital allocation or time, we're looking for what we call short-term gains. These are opportunities that within 12 to 18 months, or a relatively short period of time, give us the ability to generate some pretty decent profits. The other 40%, and that's really where the profits end up going, is to invest in passive cash flow assets, whether that's rental properties, private lending is one of our favorite strategies, or a host of other ways. And then once I have those 2 key buckets working, then the next component is what we call 20% higher risk, high reward. And that's when you can now afford to take on additional risks for projects that might be substantially more profitable. But if God forbid they don't work out, you don't lose everything. So that's been those 2 key components that I found to be very effective in every stage of the cycle.
How are you implementing that strategy right now? What do each of those buckets, that 40-40-20, what does it look like for you right now today?
Absolutely. Let me give you an example. About 2.5, 3 years ago, if you would have asked me that question, I would have said, listen, we're buying distress off market properties, we're renovating those properties, and we're flipping them. That's our short-term appreciation play. Currently, right now, what we're doing is, instead of trying to fight with every new investor who's trying to buy flip and competing with institutions that are paying retail, what we're doing is we're creating our own inventory. So we're buying infill lots, and we're focused, I would say 70% of our capital is going to what we call affordable housing, meaning that our exit price is below $400,000. So that's the way that we're allocating in today's market cycle. Instead of flipping, we're building our own infill lots. That's an example.
How do you do that? I mean, 400 to sell for 400 or less, get the land, build with everything that's going on with supply chain, costs going up, but then still have profit left. Like, how are you doing that?
That's a great question, and I mean, obviously, that's a loaded question. There's a lot of information that we can dive into on that. But to kind of give you perspective, I tell people I obviously have a little bit more of an advantage because I've been in the industry for 20 years. So I've built alliances for the last 20 years. Now, what I would tell people, to achieve that goal, you can't do it on your own. You really have to build an alliance. And so some of the builders that we strategically work with have been with me for years. And in essence, we've committed so many transactions with them that in essence, they're fully committed to give us a really strategic and aggressive pricing. Also, what we're able to do, because we're doing a little bit more volume with them, is we're able to start pre-ordering materials right when we're applying for permits because we know we're going to need them. And so we start trying to get ahead of the curve. One of the strategy that we've actually implemented to make sure that we do have certain, basically materials that we need to build these homes and to meet deadlines is we actually help contribute towards having a warehouse so that whenever they order additional AC units or any material at all, like in some cases we have pool pumps and all kinds of additional items that are taking a while to get, and we store them, and every time we have to use them, we replenish the order so that we constantly have a pipeline. So that's just ways of being proactive so that we don't have to react every time there's a shift. And what we found is that allows us the ability to really control or at least mitigate some of our construction costs. And as far as the sale, we have a team that we built that's incredible. All they're doing is constantly looking for strategic markets that we're investing in, and they're looking for these infill lots for us to negotiate and purchase.
What does the income bucket look for you now? I think you mentioned private lending and that kind of.
Yeah, so that also has evolved some, actually, believe it or not. So private lending, I would say, is the spear to my business. The reason why I say that is not that the returns are so earth-shattering. I mean, because let's be honest, some of my bridge loans are anywhere from 8.5% to 12%. So, to the naked, experienced investor, that sounds horrible. But the reality is that's the cash flow that builds the freedom. Now, with that said, one of the ways that we've also strategically positioned ourselves is we use the lending not only to build cash flow, but to also establish new alliances with clients that bring us deals and opportunities. But in addition to that, one of the things that we've done through lending is we've opened 2 buckets that are really interesting that we're working on at the moment. The first one, I think everybody knows, we've been doing some Airbnbs in strategic places by Orlando. That has really been an incredible business model because we've partnered with the operator, so they do all the heavy lifting, and we generate some pretty substantial cash flow. In fact, one of my clients that we funded just recently, he's got a property making like $300,000 a year. That's just income that you're not going to ever generate in the long-term rental market. So we're just adapting the new strategies to that. Another one that's really interesting.
One property that's doing $300K, one property?
Yes. And there's a little science behind it. It's in a strategic, what I call concentric ring by strategic areas, like, for example, Disney, the beach, areas where there's a lot of population and people coming to visit. And what we do is we basically have 14 bedrooms. Each bedroom has a theme. They have incredible amenities that are built in. And so by the time you break it down, some of these properties are really going for maybe $1,200 a day. But when you do the math, the occupancy rate, because you have such great amenities, it just keeps the property 70, 80% occupied. So you're able to perform and make some pretty good money. So that's one of the strategies. And it's been great to us. Now, there's another strategy that people don't know about, or at least is not as, I think when I say it, you'll get it, but it's not something that's as popular, and that is residential assisted living facilities. And we actually stumbled on this strategic investment through a loan. In fact, we gave a guy a loan in Tampa area. He bought 3 homes, which we thought he was going to fix and flip. Turns out he calls me 8 months into the deal and says, hey, could you come see the homes? I got to pitch you something, and I knew there was something going on. What he did is he took these homes, he converted each one into 6 bedrooms instead of 4 bedrooms, and he started renting the actual bedrooms. And they were roughly, depending on the market, but in that particular area, it was about $4,000 a month per bedroom. And so he built a business model, got the licensing. And so before you knew it, when we were vetting this deal, we realized, man, this is a viable business and it's here to stay. And the demand's only going to grow. And so that's another strategy that we started being involved in. More of a passive investor, but it's just a great cash cow, to be honest with you.
Wow. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but that makes a lot of sense, especially with what's happened in the last couple of years. What about the speculative bucket? What does that bucket look like for you today?
Yeah, so it's funny because, again, it's amazing with the different changes of the cycle. The current moment right now, what I would call our 20% higher risk, high reward, it all started actually thanks to COVID. We ended up getting in a deal because some investors backed out, and because we're a lender, once again, it opened some doors. And we're in the process right now of building a development project that is in Tulum on the beach. And those are going to be properties that we sell to consumers / vacationers. And we're looking to keep at least a third of that inventory and turn it into short-term rentals there. So obviously, we're going into a completely different country. We had to understand the rules and regulations. We had to build an entirely new legal team. And so obviously that poses an additional risk. But the potential gains are outrageous. I mean, we're talking about incredible returns on our money if this works successfully. So obviously, we started strategically making moves over the last 2 years, and we're literally starting to go vertical on the very first Porsche house in Tulum right now as we speak.
Hey, hold that thought for a minute. Do you want to take your real estate business to the next level? If you do, there's no reason to go it alone. Learn from people who've been where you want to go. Carrie and I have sold billions of dollars in real estate. We've netted over 7 figures for 7 years in a row now, and we want to see if you would be a good fit to work for us. We don't work with a lot of people, but we want to give you a chance to get on a free strategy call to see if we can help you get your business to the next level. Go to hyperfastcoach.com and apply for your discovery session today. Again, that's hyperfastcoach.com.
That's exciting. I'm sure you're learning a lot. I'm sure there's a ton of different laws, like you said, that you have to deal with and situations going into a different country. What part of the cycle do you think we are in now? I mean, a lot of people think a crash is coming just because we've been in this bull run for so long, but to me, a lot of the fundamentals look different than 2005, 6, 7. So it's kind of like uncharted territory almost, I think. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you couldn't have said it any better. I couldn't have said any better, honestly. The way that you just described it is a reality. We have an economist on our team, and you'll hear that we have a lot of different team members. I've just learned that, honestly, I don't know what I don't know. And so part of my strategy to succeed is to always align myself with people so that I always have a solid group of core members that, pour into my life. Now, with that said, I've been collaborating a lot with our economists, and there's a lot of wild cards out there, Russia being one of them. But when you take a look at our actual market itself, and you pointed it out just a second ago, if we compared apples with apples from 2008, for example, let's just go back, in fact, to 2006, so you kind of get a drastic picture of before and kind of where we are today. So back in 2006, the market was in a hyper growth. We were seeing appreciation the way we're kind of seeing right now. But the difference is that when you took a look at the population growth and migration patterns, just based on demand, for us to maintain at what I call the equilibrium, right, at par, we needed to build in America about 1.2 million homes. In 2006 alone, we built over 2.2 million homes. And so you can see that we were overbuilding based on the population growth and demand. So now add to that additional debt and loan products that we had never even heard of before, where you can pick a payment, interest-only payment. It was a recipe for disaster because cycles are based on debt. You borrow today what you don't have, right? Which means you spend money you don't have today, hoping that in the future you'll make more money to pay back what you borrowed in the first place. So that's a guarantee that in the future you're going to spend less money than what you have right now in order to fulfill on your obligations. And so it's a recipe for disaster. Now, take a look now. And again, there's a lot of other variables. Obviously, I want to be as brief as I can. But now take a look at 2022. based on population growth, based on migration patterns, and based on the amount of people coming to America, when you do the math, currently we need this year alone over 3.8 million homes. To give you perspective, last year it was 5 million homes, and we didn't even cross 2.2. We were at 2 million homes. So when you start looking at the math, we still have a massive demand for housing. There's not enough inventory. And also what you have to remember is that there's another component that most people don't realize. Back in 2006, the so-called investors that were buying properties were taking out mortgages. They were speculators. Where today, when we say that in Atlanta, for example, close to 40% of all the inventory being purchased is from a hedge fund, that's not a mortgage. That's a cash hedge fund that is betting on inflation, that is buying these properties for the purpose of holding over the next 10 to 15 years. So that creates a completely different dynamic in the industry where close to 30% of the nation's real estate inventory is being gobbled up by hedge funds that are looking at the next 10 years and they're betting on inflation. So they're hedging with real estate. And so those are completely different aspects of the business that most people don't take into consideration.
I've heard that narrative on the hedge funds, and I've also heard that they are just raising so much capital and just have enormous amounts sitting on the sideline. So there's a lot of it just still waiting to buy more. And I do remember that mid-2000s. I bought my first home in 2003, so I'm quite familiar with that. I remember those loans that you're talking about where there was like 4 options. I think you could do a 30-year payment, a 50-year payment, an interest only, and then they had one that was like a negative amortization. You could make like a minimum payment, like a credit card, and then your balance would go up that month. So they had those like 4 option ones, and it's kind of wild to think back that you could get that loan or the ninja loan, the no income, no job, no asset.
Yep.
And today, like good borrowers get they get put through the ringer by banks with all of the banking reforms that have happened. So the lending situation is completely opposite of what it was 15 years ago.
Absolutely. Now, that's not to say that in the near future, we're not going to revert back to the same mistakes. We have a history of repeating our mistakes because of capitalism, right? We get to a point that we start turning a blind eye. But when you really look at the core indicators, at the end of the day, we still have some form of a runway. Now, again, there's wild cards. There's things that we cannot foresee. I mean, I always tell people when I talk to my clients, listen, everything so far looks like we've got at least a good 24 months, and I'll look and see what's going on at that point. But we could get bombed. We could have some war come to our nation, and that would completely disrupt the market in general, completely. We can have another lockdown that could potentially impact our market. So there's always going to be a level of risk. But when you look at the sound principles that history shows us, real estate has always been an incredible vehicle because you're dealing with an asset class that allows you to generate cash flow. You have multiple strategies. You can actually have depreciation. You also get appreciation. And because of all of these incredible benefits, you really don't lose money unless if you sell in a down market. I mean, I still had properties that now have come up that I just held and they cash flowed. They weren't that great. But now over time, I'm to the point now where not only did I cross my initial investment, but now I've exceeded it because we've already had almost 20 years of time of growth in appreciation. And so that's one of the beauties. And that's one of the reasons why I still feel pretty confident about real estate in today's market, keeping my eye on all those other potential issues. But I'm pretty confident that we still have a runway based on the current demand, based on the population growth, which is not going anywhere, and we just don't have the inventory.
What do you think the impact of these higher interest rates, and then the inflation report came out yesterday, like 8.5, I think, which was the highest since 1981 maybe, or 1980. Where do you think, or what impact do you think inflation and the higher interest rates have on the real estate market? It almost seems like those two things are kind of at odds with each other a little bit.
Yeah. No, they are. But actually, if I could just make one quick note that I think is essential. A lot of people hear the news and they hear, like you said, 8% inflation. First of all, that's insane. But what most people don't realize, and this is data that we got from our economist, is that, and again, this is not a political statement, so I don't want people to get frustrated about who I'm voting for or not, because that's irrelevant. But this particular administration has realized that this looks really bad on them. And so what they've actually done is they've done what I call moving the goalpost. And so when you take a look at the measure of what constitutes inflation, what you'll notice if you really dig deeper is that they've changed it a little bit. So now what's not included in that particular measure that tells us 8%? Well, first of all, food is not in there. Second of all, fuel and transportation is not in there. And third of all, real estate is not on that list. So when you actually combine all those measures, if you actually blended the rate, it's closer to 15 to 16% annual inflation right now. And so that's really a real number. Now, what does that mean, right? We haven't had these kind of numbers in a very, very long time. But what it does mean is that inflation is inevitable. And so if you are going to be investing money, you need to consider the investments that you're putting in that are going to be able to hedge against that particular inflation growth. Now, some of Americans are not even aware, but I've done business internationally. I know people that literally had a fixed mortgage in Mexico, for example, and back in the 70s, and no joke, the inflation went so high up that within 2 years, they were able to pay off the mortgage they had fixed based on the rental increases over the course of 24 months. Now, I don't suspect we're going to get to that point. But what I'm trying to say is this is the time to lock in a low rate if you do have a mortgage, because inflation is only going to go up over the next 10 years. And if that happens, if you have an asset like real estate that's going to grow with inflation, your rent is going to grow with inflation over the next 7 to 10 years, your return is going to exceed what you're dealing with inflation. And that's what these hedge funds are betting on. Now, with regards to looking at the real estate cycle and saying, well, guess what? Now the rates are going up. Now, I agree there's got to be a balance, and I do believe that people are only going to be struggling with the ability to get qualified for bigger mortgages. But keep this in mind. I think it's healthy that we slow down the appreciation growth, because right now there's not enough inventory. So people are going to overpay. So we want a healthy balance of slowing it down. And I believe that interest rates going up will make it a little bit more difficult. But mark my words, you're going to start seeing a lot more and more as the market changes. 40-year mortgages and other really interesting products. They're going to begin in the form of responsible services. So a 40-year mortgage, the rates are going to be higher, but you can still afford a little bit more than if you had a 30-year mortgage. They're going to start getting innovative, but they're still going to require that you qualify. Where you have to be careful is when you notice that you can just say how much you make, when you notice that they start giving you a pick-up payment plan, that's when the writing is on the wall that we are in the saturation stage and we really need to be careful because that's when there's a correction ahead.
Hey, hold that thought. Do you want to get 100 tips for free from my best-selling real estate book, The Hyperlocal, HyperFast Real Estate Agent? If you do, go to HyperFastTips.com and you can download 100 of my best tips today. Again, that's HyperFastTips.com. You can download 100 tips on how to grow your business, get more clients, deliver more value to more people. Go to HyperFastTips.com.
I distinctly, I think, remember starting to see those types of products. I think probably a year to 18 months before things changed. So that would be interesting if we saw them again. I think the 40-year, there have been some of those that have been, approved by Fannie Freddie in this new Dodd-Frank era. I don't know about that multiple payment plan. If that's
that's at the end of that. I would say right now, at least we have some runway. But I will say you'll see that 40-year mortgages becomes a new thing that we use. You look at other countries like Japan. I mean, that's a standard mortgage. When people tell me, Rick, what are prices going to look like? Look at California. I mean, those prices are ridiculous. The average house in, Santa Ana, which is an area we used to flip properties at, I mean, those homes are at $700,000. I remember buying them for $200,000. There's now 3 to 4 applicants to qualify for one mortgage, and they're turning the little garages into an apartment so they can rent it. So there's a lot of innovation going on, and we can anticipate that happening. And so where is the 40-year mortgage becoming so attractive right now? In California. So what we can expect over the next few years is as interest rates go up and as affordability goes down, you're going to have a humongous element of population that is going to go back to renting properties. And that's why these hedge funds are betting on that. But then for those that want to own, they're going to have new products and services that will give them the ability to afford more than what they would afford traditionally in your 30-year mortgage. Now, if we start going incredible and we bump up 2 points in mortgage rates and interest rates, that could still have a pretty solid impact on the demand. So obviously, It all depends on a balance, right? But if we grow up by, I don't know, half a point, 1 point over the next 12 months, it's not great, but it's definitely going to be something that helps us to slowly stabilize the growth pattern of, we don't want to see hyperinflation. That ultimately everybody pays the price for that later on.
Right. My guess is that they're going to try to slow down the rate of the increase in loans and interest rates. I think they're going to use, right or wrong, they're going to blame inflation on Russia and say that there's nothing they can do, and I think they'll ease off a little bit on the decisions at the Fed that push rates up, but we'll see. Back in 06, 07, I think rates were still at like 6% on mortgages. I don't think we saw like under 5 or where we are now. Like we never saw that in this country until like 2010, 11, 12. So it was post crash. So six, even if they go to 6% or more, that's still in the range of pretty darn low from where they've been, if you go back 50, 60, 100 years in the U.S.
Yes. Yeah, it's still going to be relatively affordable. I agree 100%.
What do you think if you're like a new investor getting into this market or thinking about getting into real estate, what do you think someone's first steps should be?
What I tell people is, if you're just starting out and you're wondering, how do I get in the game? The first thing I'm going to just caution you, don't try to build an empire. Very few people make it. You're going to have so much more heartache, and at the very end, you're going to realize that the reason why you got into investing in the first place was so that you would be free to do what you want, and now you got to manage this monster empire. I'm speaking because I did that. What I would tell people, if you're just starting out and you don't own a house, your first goal, buy a house, maybe a duplex, so that you can rent half of it and start producing income. I would really suggest starting out small like that. The other thing I would suggest is, you don't need to have $1 million to become financially free. It's really wise to save money and invest it wisely. And the way I say is this way. And I've got a couple quick examples that I can give you so people can connect. So we have a client that's been working with us now for several years. She actually works in a nonprofit organization. So to be honest with you, I think we all know in the industry, very few nonprofit organizations pay 6 figures. So obviously she doesn't make a lot of money, but she was very prudent. She bought a place. She rented the space to her friends. In essence, they were paying the mortgage. So what she did is she started taking what would have been her contribution to the mortgage and her car and started saving it and saving it and saving it. After a couple of years, she saved $40,000, which is pretty awesome. But as luck would have it in real life, not everything's beautiful. So what ended up happening to her is her car broke down that was paid off. And so now she had a choice to make. Do I take this cash so I don't have any debt and go buy a brand new car that is reliable, and that's when the light switch hit, and she says, why don't I start thinking like an investor? So she was studying our content at the time. So what she did was very awesome. She took this money, she invested it in a fixed mortgage. She was generating an 8% return. And from the interest she earned from the actual loan, she actually financed a vehicle, and she had money to spare. So not only did she cover her insurance in her car, but she had money left over. So she still had this cash, and the cash was working for her so that she can have her lifestyle. And I think that's really what you really need to start shifting, is the mindset of an investor, where you start saying, even if it's a small investment, what assets can I invest in that will produce enough income to support the lifestyle that I want? And I think that's the biggest and most important advice that I can give somebody getting started, because you don't need $10 million to be financially free. It's all about, what is your monthly expense? When you can get to the place where a couple investments, little by little, generate enough money to cover that, you're free, because you don't have to work anymore. You get to find opportunities to build wealth.
So come up with that obtainable goal of just replacing your job or being able to cover the expenses of the lifestyle you have now with your real estate investments. Like, don't
exactly 100%.
Don't go for that 100 million kind of goal or whatever it is. No. Right? Like,
get free first, and then you can worry about what you want to do and whether you really want to do something big or not. I'll give you another example. I have a friend of mine. He's a pastor, great guy, one of the few guys that I really respect. He lives what he says. He felt like he was called to do other business and other mission work. So he literally stepped down from being a pastor. Again, I want to give you examples of real people. These people are not making millions. He had bought his house. The house built pretty substantial equity. He sold the house, made about $400,000, took that money and started investing it. Now he's got a pretty decent house, just about free and clear, if not already at this point free and clear. But he took the proceeds from those properties, and all he's got to do is literally flip or build 2 to 3 homes a year. And from those profits annualized, he pays for what he would be working at a really hard job, working 80, 90 hours a week. And so he just basically took it to another level. He said, look, I'm still active. I still want to do things, but I want the freedom to minister to people and help out. So why don't I turn 4 or 5 deals a year? That's relatively low work effort, and it's almost part-time. But from these profits, I'm going to pay for my lifestyle. And so again, you don't have to be a billionaire to get to that point. It just small gradual steps. And once you figure out your path and what you want to do, you have the capacity and now the ability and the flexibility to then go and pursue an empire, or who knows, maybe you want to travel and that's all you wanted to do. I have a client that does that right now all over the world, and she lives off her passive income.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Rick. Before we wrap up, I always like to do a HyperFast round if you're ready for some rapid-fire questions here.
Shoot.
All right, what's your biggest piece of advice to a new real estate investor?
My biggest piece of advice is literally, my grandma used to tell me this way: tell me who you spend your time with and I'll tell you who you become. If you want to be successful, align yourself with smart people that are already there.
What's a common mistake that you see experienced real estate investors making?
So I believe, and this has happened in my case, that one of the biggest mistakes that we make is we fall in love with numbers and we like quantity because we get to brag about it. And we literally will compromise quality over the quantity. And ultimately, that quantity leads to a lot of pain and a lot of headaches that you could have avoided in the first place.
All right, if you had to start all over, you couldn't take your money, you couldn't take your reputation or contacts with you, all you could take is the knowledge you've learned in 2 decades, what would you do first?
I mean, if I don't have any money, right, I'm starting over again. So what I would probably do is find a circle of people in the area that I'm at that are already doing it, find out what their criteria is, begin serving those investors and building relationships, and then start using the profits to reinvest in income producing assets as quickly as possible so that I can bring balance to my life. And then I would reassess what I want to do.
What is the biggest thing or the newest thing that you're most excited about right now?
So I would say the most exciting thing right now is that I'm at a point in my career where I don't have to. And I would say that one of the biggest things that I've been really trying to figure out how to align with my business is purpose. And in fact, I wrote a book called Investing with a Purpose as a challenge to myself. And so the thing that's exciting me the most is that the investments that we allocate money for right now, the profits that they generate, are helping save lives in places like Ukraine right now. I mean, we've helped literally take out over 25,000 people that actually were getting bombed and under attack, and we've taken them to neighboring countries into safety. We have an orphanage that we've actually ended up turning into a housing facility for people. And all of that is coming from the profits that we generate. So we truly have the ability and opportunity to invest with purpose. And I would say that's the one thing I am completely excited about.
All right, last question. Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
So in the next 5 years, I see myself retired and living out my missionary purpose that I have, and literally developing a bunch of associate partners to help run the organization so that I can be more free to do the philanthropy that I'm so called to do.
All right. Well, thank you for being on the show today, Rick. If people want to get in touch with you or learn more about what you do or connect with you, how should they do that?
Absolutely. So again, I got an audio book called Investing with a Purpose. If they want to find out more and get some free resources and even an economic forecast that we recently got from our economist, they can go to rickmelero.com and just register on the site, and they'll get the audio book immediately and a lot of additional resources like the forecast.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being on the show today, Rick. And to all of our listeners and viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. Please leave us some feedback, give us comments, and share this episode with people that you think would benefit from seeing it or listening to it as well. We'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure and go to hyperfastagent.com to learn about upcoming in-person and online events. And don't forget to share this show with someone that you think could benefit from hearing it, and make sure you subscribe on YouTube or anywhere that you can find podcasts.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of the HyperFast Show. Subscribe to us if you want to make sure you get the latest and greatest HyperFast shows. And remember, we love reviews. Reviews help us bring better and better guests and improve our shows. So give us the good, the bad, and the ugly. We hope you enjoyed the show, and we will see you next time.
Hey guys, thanks for sticking around to the end. I hope you enjoyed that video, and if you want to see more, click right here. And if you want 100 real estate tips from my best-selling book, click right here to download them instantly. And if you're new to this channel, click below to subscribe.